Hi, I'm here with Ralph Keeney, Professor Emeritus at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. He is an accomplished author and expert in the field of decision analysis. And I'm just so happy to have this conversation today with you, Ralph, about your latest book, Give Yourself a Nudge, and other great insights and tools that you have as not only an accomplished consultant with your US marketing and decisions group, but also in academia, but you're also a parent. You have lived a full and rich life. And so I think that you have such a full body of wonderful knowledge for people who are seeking to parent or mentor with peace and prosperity in their lives. So I'm excited to get started. I'm going to put my book down. There's the book.
Thank you.
You know, early on in your life, when we talked earlier, you described how you kind of set an intention or a list of values for yourself that kind of have guided your life. Can you talk just a little bit about that experience of really honing in on your intentions?
I can. I think I was very fortunate growing up in a small town in Montana of about 7,000 people because I had more freedom than I would have had in a city. And I learned very young that what I'd like to do is to be able to do anything I wanted to do and be free to do that. And I somehow, although I didn't maybe have all the words, I realized the only way you can influence anything in your life is purposefully is through your decisions. So I would kind of think about what I might really like, and then I would think about how can I do that. And then my mom raised me, and I had to think about sometimes how can I have this acceptable to her? Because when you're quite young, this is a little bit preteen, obviously your parents have a lot of control over you, and they should. And I figured out a key aspect of that, which is in the book, and why this is key for kids to learn decision making as well as adults to become better. And one of the most important things, if you want to do something and you're a kid, all you have to do is make sure the alternative you're choosing is a good deal for your parent or the adult decision maker or your teacher, whoever's controlling it. And you can usually do that. I mean, parents usually want the best for their children. And at some stage, when you're young, that means do well in school, don't cause significant problems and do stupid things and hurt yourself. And maybe keep a clean room, contribute around the house, etc. And you figure that out. So everything you really want to do, you could offer a good deal. Say, you know, if I really spend a few hours cleaning the house as well as I can do it and making my contributions, the things I can do, is it okay if I have the whole rest of the weekday to go visit a friend? And very likely that would be a great deal for the parent, at least in a little town, because it's pretty safe visiting other people and the parent doesn't have to take you there. You can go on your own. So
Right.
Not inconveniencing for a half an hour car ride. So that just worked. And I followed that forever. And it's certainly a very key thing with employers and colleagues you're working with and in consulting and family units that you have. If you're in a family and you'd like to do something, if you can make it good for everybody in the family, they're going to think it's a good idea.
Right.
And you're not taking advantage of them. You're creating something useful for them.
Right, right. You also described kind of setting up, I thought it was so interesting when you when you personally like looked at career opportunities and things like that, and you kind of had a list of values for your life that you wanted to have available to you, right? So for example, when you worked at Duke or when you worked at USC, how you really anchored back into that commitment you made to yourself. Can you explain a little bit about that commitment that you made to yourself about your lifestyle and about how you wanted to live your life?
Sure. The clarity of it changed over time. As I said, when I was young, it was to be free and to do what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And want was usually rather short term. And then actually, Janis Joplin had a song, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." And so I kind of made me think, maybe I think about, why do I want to be free? And that's, it's to have the life I would like to have. And to be specific, it's to enjoy, i.e. get, and to contribute to others and society are the two parts of it. And I did, maybe 40 years ago anyway, sit down and carefully write down my life objectives. Then there are kind of two categories of the really fundamental life objectives. I'd like to enjoy things and have fun and kind of the feeling parts of life. And I'd like to learn things and understand things and be able to use that knowledge, etc. So that's the learning part, the feeling and learning. And that's basically my experiencing life. I'd like that to be great. And then there's the other part. I'd like to contribute to the quality of life of friends and family. And then I'd like to make a contribution or some contributions to society in general. Now, those are the strategic objectives. Some people could say, well, you missed the most important objective of mine, and that's to have great health. And I certainly have that as a very key objective. But there's that objective and two like it, like I'd like to have time to do what I'd like. And in the modern world, you need some funds. And I think health, time, and funds is a little bit like clothing, food, and shelter were at one time. In the modern society, they're essential. But those are means objectives to me. And the distinction's very key. If I had great health, but I had no enjoyment, no feeling fun, no learning, I'm not contributing to anybody else's life, I don't have a life. So the health is crucial to be able to do that. But if I don't then use it, it's not making my life any better. And the same is true about time and money. And so I laid those out, and always they're the principles for me. And I don't go to those for every decision I make. I kind of see small, most of my decisions are much smaller. But if I have a real significant one, like do I want to go to Europe and live for 2 months? I mean, that's worthy of 2 years. That's worthy of a little bit of thought. And I think, well, how's that going to contribute in the larger sense to what I really care about? The enjoying life and the others.
Right. Now, as a child myself of decision analysis parents, do you find that understanding those qualities and practicing a life where you're anchoring your big decisions in like who you are and what you care about, so like your heart and also into your mind, like integrating this into a whole person, do you find that having practiced that as a parent and as parents, right, with your partner in life, was that a natural spillover into how you parented? Like, did you find that showing up and teaching that just as a way of acting in your own life as an example for your kids and how you showed up as a parent?
Absolutely. I mean, because I think the only way our son, who's now 33, could influence anything in his life purposefully was through his decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually had him learn some of that very early. I mean, we were doing this on our own and we had a lot to learn in the process. But when he was about 8, my wife had a great idea. We'd have a family forum meeting every Monday night at dinner. And it was to discuss any issues anybody had with the family, the home, the anything. And the first time, I remember the first question, we explained that was going to happen. And he was looking around, ooh, this could be bad. People are talking about what's wrong with people. And, and my wife asked me, she said, you know, do you have any concerns with things I do and everything? And I said, well, one thing, I'm the dishwasher. And many times I notice you put things in the sink and you don't put any water in them. And by the time washing the dishes comes, it's much more difficult. It'd be a lot easier if you just put a little water in them when you put them in there. And she, of course, said, oh, I didn't realize I did that. I could probably do that. And I said, yeah, that would make things better. And our son kind of, ooh, this is maybe not so bad. And we went through a few examples like that. And then we asked him if he had any concerns, and to make it not personal, easier for him, said, for instance, is there anything you'd like to improve in your room maybe? Oh yeah, there's a lot of things. Oh, well, what's one of those? And he came up with an idea, and it was easily improvable, and said, well, that's possibly we could do something. What would be one alternative there? Because you want him to create alternatives. How? He came up with one. I said, that's a reasonable alternative. What's another one? Came up with another very quickly. That's good. What's another? He got a third. And then I said, well, I think all of those are probably doable. Which one would you prefer? And he thought about it a little bit and he chose one. And I said, I think we could do that. And in that little setting, he just realized something. I mean, he could pick up things pretty quickly. More is better, and we certainly have numerous examples. But it was, if he just uses words, explains what he cares about and would like changed to make his life a little better, if it's reasonable, it's probably very doable. And then you got to create the alternatives. And I think that trait he certainly got. And of course, we used that for years because we had these meetings every week. And one of the reasons for the meetings is because once you get a teenager at some age, they typically don't want to tell you things, and all you're doing is restricting their life. We wanted him to know, here's the way to avoid the restrictions in your life. And we wanted him to communicate with us when he really had a problem, fixing up the room or improving it. That was great, but that's practice, and you do want to practice. So as it happened, he came home from high school one day about a month into the year and opened the door and just hollered. He said, we have to have a family forum. And we both smiled. He couldn't see us. It was perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Talk to us about what the problems are, and we have a pretty good chance together we can make things better. I mean, we're not going to cave into anything, but you can explain the reasoning there, and often that worked, and compromise was a standard thing. And he certainly thinks much of this way. If he wants something, he has to be clear about what he wants, what he hopes to accomplish by pursuing it. And then it's good to think of a few good alternatives, because if you just have one that's okay, it'll just be okay. If you think a little harder, you might get a great one.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about alternatives is to also, you know, in creating those, do you find yourself kind of going, what's the craziest thing you could do? You know, sort of busting out the box and saying, or could you mix some of these alternatives to make something that meets even more of your needs? Do you find yourself doing that as a parent?
Oh, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And I find myself doing that on all my own decisions too, where, of course, I'm a parent by definition, but it has nothing to do with being a parent. Uh,
Okay.
in the sense that the only reason anybody should care about an alternative is they hope to achieve something. That's what your objectives do for you. I also use the term values, and objectives related. They're not identical. Values to me is anything you really care about in a decision. And an objective is a particular way to state it, that thing you care about, such that what you hope to achieve regarding it. The reason for the differentiation is objective sounds a little technical and people wonder, well, is this really an objective or not? Understanding their values, i.e. what they care about, they can state it any way they want. And the key thing is to get it stated. Then you can clarify what you mean by it.
So, can you give me an example of a value and an objective, just off the top of your head? Like
Oh, sure,
in
tons.
a story or an example.
They're really closely related. I mean, you could say my values for what I hope to achieve on the vacation is, fun, not too expensive, see some things I haven't seen, etc. And then to be a little more specific with fun, what do you mean by fun, and what does that imply you should maybe be pursuing? And I state an objective with a verb in a object. That's why it's subjective. So one of the simple ones there, like cost of the vacation. What do you want to do with cost? That's obvious. You'd prefer all things this equal, lower cost to higher cost. Most people would. That's all things equal. That doesn't mean, and the trade-off is, of course, you'd pay more money for more enjoyable things. And that would be a statement of the objective. And cases is somebody care about the environment of something they were doing. Well, does that mean you'd like to minimize the pollution into the stream? You'd like to lessen the amount of smell from something? You'd like to enhance the living conditions for the fish in the stream? And any of those, just a verb and an object. It's just clarification of what you really hope to achieve. But then, so alternatives, the purpose is to get back to things, is to achieve objectives. So the way to really help you create alternatives is to start with your objectives and say, how could I achieve that? And you can come up with ideas. And you do that for each of your objectives. And then exactly as you posed, you would look at the ones that might help on one objective, and on a second objective, well, how can we combine these so that they help on both? So there's a lot of combining as you go through. And that's a way to be pretty effective at creating some alternatives that are better than the most obvious ones or the ones you used last year.
Yeah, I think that you're also speaking to sort of the automatic nature of our habits, or our sort of go-to things that we do, and maybe those practices actually aren't serving us. And so when you step back and go, what are my objectives? What do I care about? What are my values? That then you're kind of busting out of that routine thinking. And I've always done this way. Well, that's a trap.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It does help you be a little more effective and bust out, but a common thing is many decisions, and most of them we face, are problems. And we don't want problems. A lot of us would like to get rid of them. They think, oh, let's get rid of that. How can I do that? And right away, you get one idea. Oh yeah, that's good enough. Well, solving those problems never improves your life. It only gets it back to what it was before the problem occurred. Mm-hmm. And you'd like to be a little more broad and think of, given I'm in this situation, what could I do to make life even better, as well as eliminate that problem? And you're going to come out with some more creative ideas in that situation. And again, the only reason to address the problem is you hope to achieve something. trivially get rid of the problem, but one should be a little more specific than that of what you hope to achieve if
Right.
it's an important decision.
Right. In video, my kids will say, level up, right? So that you're going to level up with that decision. You're not just going to go for the routine, is what I'm hearing you say. And that when you level up, then it opens up new possibilities for the downstream decisions that you might be thinking through, because you're practicing thinking bigger, thinking bigger. I want to point to something that was really interesting you talked about that made me think, gosh, you've been working on this book title, Give Yourself a Nudge, since probably before your son was 8, that your forums were really a nudge about like creating a policy and creating a framework for the trajectory not to be automatic, for the trajectory to be anchored in a family unit, in supporting each other, in sharing authentically, in really communicating what's going on, and seeing each other as resources for each other to level up, right? It's just an observation. What inspired you to author this book, Give Yourself a Nudge?
What inspired me with the book to?
Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly I didn't have the term nudge when I was young, and Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein wrote a famous book about nudges, and it had a lot to do with somebody would frame the decision that you need to face, and the framing would greatly change the alternative that would be chosen by the person facing it. And it's just a great word because it doesn't imply there's a big analysis. It just implies there's some clear thinking. There's some different thinking, and that's what my book is just things that can kind of push you in the direction to where you're going to make better decisions, but you don't need to analyze them, because we're not going to analyze most of our decisions. The vast, vast, vast majority of our decisions, we wouldn't. We don't have the time, and it's not worth the effort. So a little bit of clear thinking, each improvement on your clarity of the decision is a slight push or a constraint, you can think of it, or a guide to make a better choice. And nudge just sounds like a great word. In Thaler and Sunstein's book, the nudges were created by a choice architect, as they called it, typically someone in a government or an agency who could frame the decision that needed to be faced by a lot of people. And for most of your decisions, there's no one to frame that. There's no choice architect. The only one, i.e. the person who characterizes the decision, is you. And so that was the thing that it's kind of the same essence. If you think of one objective that you hadn't thought of for your decision that influences what you do, that's pretty important. It's going to be more in line with achieving the objectives, including the one you had not thought of until you did think of it.
Yeah. I think I just want to clarify, like, when we speak of analysis, right? It's like mathematical analysis of probability, like that trajectory is not commonly used. Like, that's used in the field of decision analysis. But what you're talking about is really taking time to reflect on who you are, what you care about, how you can show up in this decision. What do you care about, or what does your family care about, to make it the most meaningful decision for you and have the greatest impact?
Yeah, I kind of divide the decision making into two parts. I now call the front end, which is what my book deals with, and the back end, which is typically the analysis. And when I first started learning about what was done in the decision area, when I was particularly beginning grad school, I thought people would know what their decisions were. And typically this was done for business or government problems and decision analysis. And I thought, you just go sit, ask them, what's the decision problem that's tough that you're facing? What are the objectives and what are the alternatives? And you'd have them in 20 minutes. Then you'd go do the analysis and gather data that was needed and deal with balancing achievement on the various objectives. And people, this includes me, are not great at that front end. They often aren't addressing the decision they should address. They're addressing something that relates to it. And I've done very clear research. People cannot list all their objectives of a complex decision. This includes me. I'm not going to get all of mine. I got a lot of processes to stimulate my thoughts to do a better job, but it doesn't happen. And they're not going to create all the alternatives, and they're going to miss some very, very good ones. So that says the front end's pretty important. And two, how could you do a great back end if you don't have the right decision or all the objectives you care about or a bunch of good alternatives? Any of those is going to totally derail an analysis. So the front end's pretty crucial, and the front end has nothing mathematical, nothing technical. It's just clear thinking that people can do. You don't need any equipment. You don't need computers. You just need to think. I will think about my decision and decide what decision I should face, what I hope to achieve by doing that, my objectives, and then create some good alternatives to do it and choose one.
So what
And
you're just describing is your book is really about the front end, like rather than building the foundation to your house on a different lot and then building your house here, which isn't really going to help you.
That's a very good analogy.
What you're talking about is aligning really the foundation, which is the front end, which you cover in your book, is like I it's amazing. It's just sort of like techniques and ways to think about it. It's wonderful. So that you're building your house on your foundation, and that what you're doing is practicing masonry, right? Like as you're addressing your first decisions and really being intentional, you're practicing building that foundation, and you're seeing results, and then you go back and build more and build more. And it seems like that you started that as a small child and have authored a life that really aligns with who you are and what you care about.
Well, I'd like to think I've done some of that and been fortunate in the process, but you really do have an awful lot of control. I mean, I certainly had assignments in college. I was in engineering, and I didn't want to do some of them. And because I wasn't interested, not that I was obstinate. I was certainly interested in learning what I was supposed to learn by this. But maybe an example's the best one. When I was a freshman, all 250 of us at UCLA were supposed to design an electric shoe polisher. I didn't want to design an electric shoe polisher, and I thought the purpose, I was thinking of what the purpose of the teachers were, that we'd learn a lot about the whole process of a product and designing it and what one needed to address. And so to be quick, I learned that UCLA had a research group that did things in the high Andes, working with people who lived there, and they had a lot of trouble with housing. And there's no electricity up there. You couldn't have a cement mixer, so you couldn't use the rocks which were there to kind of cement them together and do anything. And so I went to the teacher and asked, what are your objectives that you have for us to learn things, and found out, and it's basically the obvious. And so I proposed to develop a cement mixer that could be used in the high Andes, and it was powered by a llama, because they had llamas, they didn't have electricity. And I said, this would probably be a little more interesting for you to have one llama cement mixer and 249 electric shoe polishers rather than 250. And I said, I won't take up too much of your time, although I'll certainly communicate with you about it. And he said, fine. And I got funds to even build that and had my friends be substitute llamas and designed it and rolled it around outside. And there's a lot to design a little cement mixer, but it was so much more interesting and worthwhile for me. And I think it actually had a little positive effect. I heard they took it down there. I didn't know what happened after that. It might have been used and had some usefulness because they had 50-gallon drums down there. And so what it was is sort of like a lawnmower. If you're going forward, the front rolls around and cuts the grass. I mean, an old hand-blown llama. This was the same thing, only the llama would pull it and the barrel was on the side and it would roll around, and you'd need the cement in there, but then you needed to figure out how to get an axle through the middle and how to get the cement in it with the water and have it not pour out. Interesting things. And it was way more fun to do. I probably put more time into it, but it was just a lot better deal.
Boy, there's a lot in there. You invested yourself into a real problem. You enrolled your teacher in your vision. You were aligned with your vision about having impact in the world. Like you said earlier in the conversation that you wanted to have societal impact, right? And it was showing up even as a freshman in college with an assignment about a shoe polisher, right?
Right. I thought that would be less interesting. I was probably a little more self-centered in the case, though, for learning and everything, but it does align with that. I mean, it might be useful to somebody. And
yeah.
I'm sure design, I mean, really, if it became useful, you'd have some people who knew a lot more than I improve the design, but that's the purpose.
I wonder if it's still a problem in the high Andes. And I
don't know,
wonder,
but certainly some places don't have electricity, and the general thing that an animal could roll barrels around by just pulling it if you hooked it up, and if you needed mixing of a certain set. I'm sure other people have used that general idea somewhere.
yeah, it would be interesting to contact some, NGO nonprofit who deals with high Andes and say, hey, is this a problem? Because I bet a lot of engineers who could design something amazing that could be a tremendous legacy of something simple, even how people could construct it themselves, right?
Oh,
right?
Sure. Yeah, the idea was they wouldn't be constructed and sent there. They could be constructed there. You might need to send the axle. The axle was kind of a metal thing down through the middle of the barrel.
Right. How could you make safe housing? I mean, I just think about all kinds of situations where that would be really useful. Maybe it's more earthquake safe. Maybe it's, than
Sure.
masonry, with no reinforcement, right? My thoughts are going now. So I wanted to just ask you about one other thing in your book.
Sure.
And we could talk forever. And that is, you have on page 226, you have this great sort of summary page about like a highlight. If I were making a decision, I could go through this and kind of just take an inventory of my decision and kind of making sure that I've kind of contemplated each of these steps as I go through to be practicing robust decision making for myself and to give myself a nudge. And what's nice is there's deeper information in the book for each of these bullet points that you have about kind of how to get clarity about each of those steps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think all of these steps are common sense. None of them are, sophisticated in a sense. And individuals can use each of those and depending on the decisions you're facing, some may be more helpful than others, but they're aimed at the three key things I mentioned in the front end. What's the decision you really should face? What are your objectives for that decision? And what are the alternatives? And then there are three other general categories that are pretty important there. One is about decision problems. And decision problems mostly are problems. And who loves problems? That means something you have to deal with. Your car broke down, you lost your job, somebody in your family got a sickness, and of course you deal with them and you try to get things back to where they were beforehand. But as I mentioned, that doesn't improve your life. It improves it relative to having that problem, but it doesn't improve it to what it was beforehand. So I ask, who should be making your decisions? And the answer is obvious. You should. So who should be choosing the decisions that you're going to face? And that usually causes some thought. And the answer, or at least my answer, is you should a bit more than you do, probably. And you includes me. And so what happens is the word a decision opportunity. They're the only way you can influence anything in your life. So you can just be sitting there like we are and think of something, you know, what would really be nice that I would like to have? And it could be for yourself or for your family or community, and you come up with it, an idea. Now, the decision problem is, how do I make that a reality? And then you figure out, what are the objectives? What do I really hope to achieve by that? What are the alternatives? Then if you pursue it, it's going to improve your life, because your life didn't get worse by creating that decision opportunity. Then another key point is, many times important decisions that you care about can be or require the agreement of another person. An example was the teacher who had to say, yes, I could use the cement mixer as my project. So what I tried to do was think about how that would be a decent thing for him too. In this case, a little bit more interesting. And I found out his objectives for the students in doing this, and certainly explained and designed it such that it would achieve those. Because his objectives was to have me learn some things. So I made sure it would contribute to that and was more enjoyable and, in a sense, fun for him. So that got it approved. And it's not like I'm exploiting him. He got a little boost in life, and I got what I wanted. And that's the way to get them. That's the other thing there. And then the very last one, it is worthwhile to think a little higher. You know, what do I hope to achieve and contribute in life? Because that's sort of the basis for all the decisions on the and the objectives and the alternatives on the more specific decisions you face. Because every one of the thousands and thousands of decisions you make are your influence on your life. That's it. So you'd like them to be somewhat consistent with each other to contribute more to that life. So those are the 6 things for which all those nudges are kind of outlined, just to distinguish between them, indicate where they are in the book, and allow the person to be a little more aware of them.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. I'm excited. I'm excited to see how this, like the results from this book and feedback. Do you ever hear back? I know you've authored values-focused decision making, and do you ever hear back from people who read your book and the impact that it's had on them? Or
I do.
Good.
I have, and I mean, that's one of the nicest rewards. One story that I really like that is in the book is, a few years ago, before this book was published, but when I gave a talk on, I'd given the talk on some of the ideas, and a guy came up to me in a professional meeting in Washington, D.C., and he said, I wanted to thank you for something that you did. I said, oh, well, that's nice. And he said, you don't know me. And he said who he was. And he said, uh, the situation is the following. A couple years ago, his wife got breast cancer and it was very serious. They lived around Washington, D.C. He had 3 daughters at the time who were like 6, 8, and 11. And it was a very difficult time. The wife was in the hospital most of the time, and they didn't go on vacations or anything. They stayed close to home, of course. And then he said things got a bit better, or somewhat better, after 2 years, and his wife suggested he should take the kids on a family vacation because they hadn't gone anywhere for a couple years. And he said, we thought about just going to Maine, to the place we had always gone for 2 weeks in the summers before. But he said, I read something you wrote that's about decision opportunities, and you can characterize the decision you want to face. And also, kids can add a lot to objectives and even some alternatives. So he said, well, maybe I'll try that. So we asked each of the kids to write down their objectives for a vacation. And of course, he and his wife did. And they wrote them down, and they came up with go to an interesting place near the water, learn something new, have a lot of fun, and make sure that the mother who would not be going had a great time to learn about it. And then the alternatives were the Maine location, Florida coast, the Gulf Coast, Southern California, and Washington State on the water, Puget Sound. And then we kind of discussed it and everything, and we chose Washington. None of us had been west or anything. We went on a vacation, had an absolute fabulous time. Every night we called home, had a long, long talk with the mother, the kids, and everything like that. And she had one of the best vacations of her life. And he said, things have even improved in the last year a lot. And this next summer, all 5 of us are going to Washington.
Wow.
Yeah, you hear that and you think, whoo.
Yeah, it's big. It's big. That's like transformative. Those children had the opportunity to author a great experience for their mom. Like what a gift
Yeah.
to their mom who couldn't go anywhere. So,
Yeah, and that was their objectives and his. That was everybody's. But they also stated that one of the things you want to do when you ask for objectives from a group is you don't want to have them talk about it right away. I always ask each person not to talk, just write down, what you care about. And by then the youngest one was 8.
Yeah.
And could certainly write down something about him. And
yeah, or draw a picture, right? You have a 4-year-old, draw a picture of what that looks like.
Sure, yeah.
Let them describe it. I mean, I think one beautiful thing, I have 3 children, and one beautiful thing when my kids were little was just the realization that they're so unfiltered.
Yeah.
Right? They're busting out my thinking all the time about assumptions I'm making, about limits in my thinking. They're just possibility. And I think that that's such a beautiful, beautiful, meaningful story. And
yeah, I like it. And it does use kids. And it also has the point that you can really teach them some decision-making aspects here. And to think about that, that's one's power. And if they have a little bit more power, I think they're going to feel better about their own lives. I have no evidence on that other than my life. I know what I felt. I felt I had plenty of influence and was phenomenally appreciative, and thinking I had a wonderful mom who thought about all this.
That impacted your life. His story impacted your life, and telling it impacted my life, right? Like that's the power we're talking about. Like the deep power. It seems simple. It is simple, but anything new, any new process of thinking takes effort, and it takes commitment, and it takes practice, and it's imperfect. And that's fine.
Yep.
It's fine. It opens us up to the world of possibilities of what our lives could look like. And I am just so grateful that you're willing to, so freely willing to share your wisdom and your ideas about what's worked, and put it out there in the world bravely in this book, but more importantly in who you are, how you're living your life, how you're contributing to people, and aligning with that great vision that you had years and years ago, 40 years ago, about what a meaningful life for you would look like. So I just think it's incredible.
Well, thank you.
Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
Well, perhaps just
Yeah.
some people may think, can I really use any of this, or will it be helpful? I think almost for sure the first answer is for sure you can use it. It's not going to stump you. It's not going to have you thinking, what is this about? Why would this be useful? So certainly on that level, it's not a problem. And decision making and this aspect of it, the front end, is a skill, and practice helps. So you can use it on simple problems, and that's practice. Not only do they make them a little better, but then you realize, oh, maybe that's worthwhile to do. That took me 2 minutes and it improved my evening. And an example, if you're going to dinner with a friend, often you think of, where shall I go to dinner? Maybe spend, and maybe in the COVID time, one doesn't go to dinner with friends too often, but you would think is, what do I hope we experience / achieve during dinner? Well, you'd like to have some fun. You may realize, well, I'd like to really learn and understand this thing a little bit better about my friend, something at work or something. And then you'd think, what would I like her or him to experience and feel that this was really a much better dinner than others? And you maybe specify a few things like that. So that's in the maybe 5 minutes you're waiting for them, or just when you're thinking of, where shall I book a place? And so 5 minutes, as a result, you got a much better idea. You have the dinner, and the evening's much better, just because you thought of it as a decision, and what would I like to do to make sure it's better than it otherwise would be. And that's practice. So then when you come to a little tougher one, like, as I said, the example of the vacation for 2 weeks, I mean, you've got tons of practice laying out some of the objectives, some of the alternatives, and so you'll probably make that decision better too.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Incredible. Incredible. I'm super excited for the impact your book's going to have on people's lives. And, you already have impact, clearly, but it's just wonderful that you've distilled it into something that's easy to understand, easy to practice, easy to just refer back to and say, oh, here's some things I can think about. Oh, I'm stuck. I could go right here. It's like just a little resource for when you're stumped or trying to bust out thinking or whatever you need. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, just when I say to people, give yourself a nudge.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Amy.